Well, hello, and a very big welcome to Being Fine, the other F word. This is our live call. I'm the editor, Jo Baldwin Trott, of this amazing book, Being Fine, the other F word. It's available on Amazon. We have a podcast. We have this show, obviously, that is now streaming live. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. I love to have your comments. So if you feel inspired to comment on anything, if you'd like to ask my guest tonight any questions, then please put them in. We'd love to hear from you. So I'm very thrilled to welcome tonight an author of a fantastic book, The Secret Lives of Men. Welcome to James Halls. Hi.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, real pleasure, an absolute pleasure. And as we've just been talking about the difference in our books, and I'll be asking you a lot about your book tonight. But this feels like a wonderful kind of completion of the circle, really, because Being Fine, if you haven't bought it yet, this is what it looks like. Being Fine, the other record. There's all amazing authors, men and women. So if that Being Fine is very much about the stories, it's about the sharing of the difficulties of anxiety, of depression, attempt suicide, surviving a loved one's suicide. All very much stories from experience of what has gone wrong, and thankfully how the authors of Being Fine, men, mostly men, but also women who have come through their journey. But this is really exciting tonight because James is a psychotherapist. James has committed most of his life, well, a lot of his life actually. So retract that, just thinking of my, just adding up the years there. A lot of his life supporting men and actually helping and providing therapy to men, mostly men, women too, but mostly men, to deal with the kind of issues that Being Fine raises. So I'm really thrilled to have you tonight, James. Thank you for sending me part of your book, which I've loved reading. I haven't had a chance to read it all yet, but it's a fantastic book. And you've only just published it last year, haven't you?
That's right. Yep. Yeah. So I'll just flash it up here. So The Secret Lives of Men and Keys to Unlock the Mystery. Yeah, I published it last February. It took me quite a long while to write. I think probably at least 7 years and doing my other jobs and that and just getting it finished, but I was really pleased to get it done, and it's been selling very well actually, so I'm very pleased with it.
Yeah, the reviews are great, men and women, a bit like our book actually. It's very interesting and very hopeful, I think, when you see men and women engaging with the book. But it's primarily about men, but obviously it's not, because it's about relationships too, which is a big part of your book. So your book's in 3 sections, and it very much is part of it is just an exploration of what happens to men, but also at the end, and the really meaty bit is obviously a guidance, isn't it, of how to support men.
Yes. So I just a little bit of backstory in terms of the book. This book started its journey when I started to give a talk to women actually on 10 tips how to understand men, and women were very keen to come to that talk. At the same time, I set up a talk called an MOT for men. No men turned up for that, and kind of what I learned about this is that women do really are interested in reading about men, connecting with men, and they'll come to talks. And but one of the reasons I wrote this book was that what I was discovering in my practice was that female partners or wives were sending or asking their husbands to go to therapy, and these men were sometimes reluctantly coming to therapy, but they were coming. And we would work with some of their emotional stuff, ultimately what I talk about is emotional fitness, helping them to be able to express a broader range of emotions, and basically some of the vulnerable emotions. And so they were going home. They were then starting to express their feelings to their wives or to their partners. And they were the women were saying, "Well, whoa, man up, mate. Gross. I don't want to hear this." And so, kind of what I learned was that actually, if we want men to develop and to to evolve in expressing a wider variety of emotions, especially the vulnerable emotions, then our expectations, women's expectations of men will have to change, as men's expectations of women. So that's kind of, the book is for women and it is for men. And of course, I suspected that perhaps more women might pick up the book, and I think it's probably true. With the hope that men will, be attracted to, drawn into it in some way.
Yeah, no, totally. It's all part of the conversation, isn't it? And it's all getting us to really question our values, our reactions. Expectations create reactions, right? And that constant, sadly, that loop. One of our reviews, very frankly, that a woman sort of describes the book and says, actually, if I'd read this 10 years ago, it might have saved my marriage. Because sadly, there are so many couples that do sort of separate and go down, and the cliche of not communicating. It sounds such a simple statement to say. Oh, I know we're not communicating, but what can I do about it? But sadly, there's so much more to it, and I've learned from editing this book how complex different stories are. Different men's experience of why they don't communicate. In their mind, they're communicating, and to them, they're communicating, but they're not communicating in the same way. So I think it's a very important book. I just want to throw into this point, and it's something that came up in a talk last week. The Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus book was profoundly kind of, important, highly received at the time when it came out. But I personally feel that sometimes books like that actually have a sort of derogatory, if that's quite the word, negative impact, and not helping the situation. That's my own view. So what would you say about that?
I would agree with you, Jo. I mentioned that book in my book. Actually, I think what it does is it puts men and women in kind of silos. And we're kind of saying this is how a woman is, and this is how a man is, and almost like we can't move. We just get used to it. And I suppose my whole basis is well, no, actually, we can evolve, and men. I think because of the way we have been socially conditioned, some of the messages that we've heard about relationships, about other men, and about emotions has actually, what I call it, the trauma of emotional restriction. So we've kind of been traumatized through a construct from a way, and then almost limited, almost like, well, don't expect that from men. I suppose my view is that we're all human. And we're all on a journey of embracing more of our humanity. And if we can, and I don't like to, I don't like this kind of language of, that men need to get in touch with their feminine side. Well, or women need to get in touch with their masculine side. I'm thinking, well, I understand, masculinities and femininities, but the idea of actually we're capable in terms of emotions, both, of course, we as male and female are capable of expressing the whole gambit of emotions, but men has often been limited to kind of anger. That's a kind of where our default is often anger in its different forms. And if you look at women, often women have been conditioned not to be angry and get told off if they get angry. So, and this is conditioning, not allowing us to, be human ultimately.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting sort of hearing you talk, but I think that is fundamentally the part of the first chapter which Kapil Gupta writes about. That actually, we are just humans, and we are a mixture of masculine and feminine energies, and that's very much the focus of his work. And we are both, and sadly, we can focus on one or the other, but we are both. And like you say, the conditioning is, it's been our journey as humans. It's been an evolution. I like to feel that, actually think that we're in a time when we're recognizing we are simply human. Hopefully we're this whole incredible time of our lives is giving us a chance to realize and validate that we are all connected, and we have this fundamental, simple truth that we are simply human. But coming on to a few of the key topics that definitely have been brought up in Being Fine, and definitely have been brought up in your book too. The word shame features quite massively, and the shame and the fear of disclosing. I'd like to ask you a bit about your story in a minute, because psychotherapists, in my experience, generally have a reason for going down that road, and I know you've shared already a little bit with me earlier. But let's just talk about shame, which is, it's, you know, a 5-letter word. It's a word that's been explored in TED Talks. But how does that word feature when you're treating and looking after your male clients?
Yeah, I think definitely shame has become a lot more prominent, I think, in my mind and in my work with men. And I think the way that, and I often do want to differentiate, you know, kind of healthy shame and toxic shame, because I think there is a healthy shame in terms of sticking to our value, our internal values. But I think in terms of particularly men, I think the whole male discourse, if we just look at the real man discourse, right there, we have the shaming of a gender. So you know, I can't just be a man, I have to be a real man, and there are certain levels of being that real man. So I think men are often shamed just through their masculinity. And I think this goes really deep in terms of keeping us hidden, keeping us inside, because the risk of exposure, and especially the risk of, you know, sharing our vulnerable emotions, it traps us. So I often, some of my work is, and I think this is especially useful in groups or men's groups, is what I call de-shaming. How do we de-shame? And we de-shame by being in a group where it's safe. And when one man, I've seen this so often, when one man may have the courage to express something they may never express before in public, something about, you know, an emotion, a vulnerable emotion, you can see all the other men sigh relief and nod along. Yeah, that's me. Yes. And we're all been silenced because we dare not say that, because we risk feeling exposed, humiliated. And I think this goes right back to, you know, I often tell the story of little boys at 6 or 7 on the playground. They very early learn what it is to express, or why they shouldn't express vulnerable feelings when they fall over. And if they dare to cry, that they will be called a girl, a wuss, a sissy, a crybaby. And so shame is right there. And that is, you must not, they've learned the lesson, you must not share those what we are still considered as weak emotions.
Yeah. And that's our primary socialization time. That's the time we learn our values, we learn our behaviors, isn't it? And again, it's such a common thread that, you know, was distressing for me to read throughout the book, to really hear that, you know, that condition was such an early age. The non-crying, you know, is such a major, you know, horrible, you know, well, untruth of being a child. And a new author coming into our book, actually, he is in his 70s. He very much talks about, and he's a clinical physician, so he is an obstetrician, and he talks, actually, he studied into the power of crying, because, excuse my terrible biology, but where our tear ducts are, they are so close to the part of the brain that releases. And I've forgotten the phrase that I was reading it this afternoon, but actually there's a very powerful correlation between crying and the releasing of that stress. Yeah. And if you've been told, as a 6-year-old boy, for example, and I can think of certainly at least one author who was told not to cry and never did until he was 40. And so all of that, and actually this author, Robert Gore, as a doctor, he explains how he knows of a case where someone actually was suffering from severe arthritis, had never cried really in their lives, and they had literally this incredible flooding of tears for literally days after days after days in releasing, and actually walked out of the therapy room with no arthritis, and that's an actual case. I mean, there's everything has an energy and everything has a knock-on effect, doesn't it? So
it's something about. Sorry, Jo.
No, go on.
No, I was just going to say, in terms of, I mean, I often break the word emotion up to emotion. You know, it's like emotions need to move. That, you know, that the body and the emotion are one. So, you know, and I often say, look, the only thing an emotion wants is to be felt. Once it can be felt, it can disperse. If we block off the ability to move emotions, to allow emotions to flow classically through tears for maybe sadness, hurt, or disappointment, then there's a whole blockage there. And, you know, and classically, you know, you get people, men talking about anger. I need to move anger. They understand that. But we don't allow it in some of the other emotions.
Yeah, and that's a whole topic in itself, isn't it? How anger is fairly seen as acceptable. It's kind of okay to get really cross or really aggressive in a way. It's not, obviously, it depends, not always. But this the other end of the spectrum of emotions, and we're focusing on them, is not allowed, is it? It's almost vetoed.
I often say, that anger is often the male default emotion. That's the only one we've got, and we're left to squeeze all the emotions out through there. So, and that may either seep out or explode out.
Wow. Wow. And your next book is going to be about anger, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah. Really cool. I'm probably with a working title of 1 minute anger. So the idea of just very short little bits about anger, what we can do with it. And I often want to break anger down. When we say anger, we think of probably aggressiveness. And I think, well, there's a lot more to anger than that, and a lot of different ways of expressing it.
Yeah. And anger can be, in my view, anger's a secondary emotion to emotion. A secondary act to emotion, rather. So, you know, it's very much, isn't it, back to this phase one of recognizing what's really going on, the feeling.
And I would add that anger is an absolutely positive emotion as well. I think all emotions, they're neither negative or positive. They just are. And if we get able to express all those emotions healthily, then fine. Because I often think, look, when we think of happiness, people are now talking about toxic positivity. And so actually, if we just got happy, we've been conditioned just to be happy, you know, smile all the time. That's actually not healthy. That's not, we're missing all the other emotions as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what I'd like you to just share now, James, is that let's talk about your story, because obviously you are a psychotherapist now. You didn't used to be, but you took on yourself on a bit of a retreat, didn't you, to find yourself a little bit. Tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. So I, at the time, I think it was my early 30s, at that time, I thought I was sorted. I thought I was kind of mature. I thought I was connected. And I was working at that time in an inner city kind of project in Hull, living in community, quite intense, lots of stuff going on. And ultimately, the whole thing broke down. And I kind of, I would say I suffered a kind of crisis, a burnout. I didn't know what to do at that point. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know my next step, which normally I'm quite like that. So I ended up thought I just need to go away for a while. And so I found and got in contact with this it's kind of spiritual retreat up in Northumberland called the Northumbria Community, in the middle of nowhere. And I lived there and kind of looked after basically retreatants. So I just did, normal things like cooking, cleaning toilets, making beds, all this kind of, and it was amazing. It was beautiful. It kind of just helped me to go inside. I did a lot of reading, did a lot of reflecting, spent a lot of time on my own, a lot of solitude, and realized how ultimately messed up I was. that I thought I was sorted, and I was absolutely, it was a cover. So I started to kind of unlearn a lot of things, and starting to break down a lot of parts of myself that I'd kind of were my external protectors. And then I started to move a lot more into vulnerability and into authenticity, and being honest with myself, perhaps for the first time in my life. And I think that was the start of my journey into counseling and psychotherapy.
So, and that all that was prompted by a burnout, then, is what you just said. So would you like to share with us what the burnout was really about, or what on reflection?
Well, I think the burnout in terms of I shared with Jo earlier, a lot of my earlier life was involved in the church, in Christianity, and I was very committed and very focused on that, very passionate. And yeah, it was my whole life ultimately, and that's sort of kind of all I knew. And I think the crisis, the burnout, was partly a crisis of faith. I'm not sure if I believe this stuff anymore. I'm not sure if this works. I'm not sure if this makes any sense anymore. And so that was something I'd given a lot of time and a lot of my life to. Suddenly I had to make this big jump to rechange, but I was kind of lost, during that time, because I was so certain at one point in my life about, this is right, this is how I see the world. And then I didn't see the world. I couldn't see the world like that anymore. So there was a sense of feeling lost, and that's where I felt I needed to go away to find myself ultimately, because I was lost.
Wow, that's really that's really impactful, isn't it? Going through that moment of recognition, and I guess it's slightly comparable to something you write about in your book, and definitely is described in Being Fine. It's having that moment to realize actually things aren't all that you believed or felt that they were. And the similarity I'm thinking of is about our parents, because you talk about in your book about how, when some of your clients suddenly realize that their parents weren't as perfect. And I suppose in a way it's similar, isn't it? We've underpinned or I definitely did the same. I underpinned quite a lot of my life based on certain beliefs around my family, and then suddenly discovering that actually that really was not what it should have been, or what was a healthy situation, environment. And that really shocks us, doesn't it? That kind of sudden, realization. It's a tough one, isn't it, to deal with?
Yes, well, exactly. And it's almost like how we meet those toughie, almost like when our world implodes or explodes. What do we do with that? We can see it. We can go, as it were, go off the rails, or try and avoid it, and to keep being asleep, as I'd say. And this is kind of spiritual language, which I use quite a lot. But I think, there's no doubt I was, even though I was in a faith, I think I was sleepwalking through life. And the work is about waking up. But that's scary, and as is growth. It's scary, to grow means change, means examining ourselves, meaning we might absolutely have to leave something that we were passionate about. So I think change is always difficult, and that's why I always think that even for men, when we kind of so much rely, I think one of the often the problems I meet in stopping growth, and I think men have learned very early on, is self-reliance. I think it's such a biggie, and I think we learn. What I mean by self-reliance is that I think boys learn self-reliance often from an emotionally unevolved father. So what do we learn from our fathers about emotions? We might hear nothing, or there might be distance. So what we learn is, dad or fathers or men, they don't share vulnerable emotions. So I need to keep them in, and I need to just rely on myself. And self-reliance becomes a massive problem in terms of relational growth, because often a part of my book is about the mystery. Often people say, oh, women, they're a mystery. And I turn that around and say, no, actually, women aren't a mystery. Men are the mystery, because we're so quiet and, the strong and silent type, the distance. Nobody knows what's going on inside our heads so often, because we never talk about it. We don't know ourselves. So we're the mystery. And I think self-reliance is part of that problem.
Yeah, and so obviously we'll have people watching this and listening. If someone is watching or listening to this and thinking, actually, that does sound like me, what's the first step you ask your clients to go down? Is there one simple step that they can take?
Well, I think the first step is getting to therapy, ultimately, to say, asking for help. Actually, I'm not okay. There's something I need to work on. And in my book, in terms of the growth towards emotional fitness, I've developed this 5-step program called Aware. So awareness, we're waking up. We're actually okay, even to say there's something wrong. I'm stuck, or I haven't grown for years. I'm still like a boy, perhaps, So for me, emotional fitness is what it means is to be able to express the right feeling at the right time, in the right way, to the right person. And that means we need to, so there are steps to do that. It's fascinating when I came across your book, Being Fine, because in my book, I use this as part of the kind of like feelings of a foreign language. And I learned that I don't ask men how they feel, very rarely, because they come out with, okay, not bad, fine, all right, normal. There's kind of 6 words for it, and that's it. And so the emotional fitness program is really, okay, if that's all we've got, we need to learn how to express more emotions. We need a bigger word bank. We need to be able to create a safety. Now, I think men are absolutely capable of expressing emotions when we're in the right place, and often when we allow work with our body. I do a lot of body work with men, so we're absolutely capable. But we might need to learn a few more bits of vocabulary. We might need to learn the fitness regime, how to exercise our emotions, how to build emotional muscles, and all that kind of stuff. So that's part of the emotional fitness program.
So almost create a difference in our physiology that then hopefully triggers an ability to speak differently. So almost that sounds like what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the body, if we say the body and the emotional one, I often say with men that what we've learned about the body is to beat the body, work the body, build the body. Few of us have learned to listen to the body. Why don't men go to GPs on time? Because they're trying no pain, no gain. There's all these kind of rules. Why don't we look after our emotional health? Because we're self-reliant. So we've learned these rules of actually don't ask for help. But our body is the great informer. If we actually connect with our body, we become more in sync with it. We can feel those emotions, but that's part of the work. Become more bodily informed.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm thinking of some of the chapters. That definitely is a correlation and a tipping point for a lot of the authors to really. One of the authors got into cycling.
Yeah.
And just started cycling, and now is such a big fan. He's incredibly fit, and that was the pivotal point, just changing something within the body to release it. There's so much we could cover, James. I'm trying to. My brain works very quickly when I'm interviewing people, and I'm thinking all these different thought bubbles are coming up. So I'd love to have you back on the show again, and with some authors next time. Because obviously, as the editor, I did write a chapter because I've spent a lot of my time with men who use the F word. My dad used the other F word. Partners have used that, so I know what it's like to be on the receiving end. I'm going to flip this on its head now and ask you another question. So, for the women watching this, who are in partnerships, marriages, or their sons, are the kind of men that have got that self-reliance, which is, we can feel it. Women are very much more sensory, I feel, and intuitive. They can feel it, but you could try every trick in the book from one's point of view and never feel like you get an inch through the wall, let alone break down the wall. What would be your advice to them, for those women listening?
Well, that's a very good question, a very difficult one to answer, I think, because I think there's sometimes kind of a kind of desperateness, I think, from women. Every time I talk to women about what my understanding of men, they kind of nod and away. Yeah, I get that, I understand it. So there's that sense of women. If women would like men to change. And I think often women get into the role of the mother, of the one who's kind of pushing them. They do most of the social work, the relational work, the emotional work in relationships. Men just go to work, So I think it's a really difficult situation to give them a nudge. What I would say, I suppose, is kind of trying to prod men to give them space to talk. So in terms with my wife and me, I'm a therapist. She's got an in-house therapist. I'm pretty good at listening most of the time, and sometimes I just want her to listen to me, and not just and to really listen, to offer empathy, that I'm staying. She's going to stay with me. She's going to just, even if I'm not saying anything. And then, because I think knowing that we have that time, because it does take a bit of time, I think, with men, to just say, I'm just going to stay with you, and stuff will come. Because I often say, look, I'm almost like, to get myself out of self-reliance, I've really got to know that you really want to listen to me. So I think giving us that time is helpful, not to overparent us, but to kind of give us that time. The other thing I say, of course, about boys and sons is to really, as you've kind of almost said, to be able to say, look, it's to teach that vulnerable emotions are fine. That we're not trying to, and even when my boys were younger, I had at the park, one of the lads fell over. It was a woman who ran up and said, "Oh, don't cry, don't cry." And I'm thinking, hold on, no, cry. He's fell over, he's hurt, he's got pain, he should be crying. So but I think that's where the cultural thing comes. We don't want boys to cry because we don't want them to be bullied. We don't want them to, whatever. But so to be able to foster environments where it's safe enough for boys to express those vulnerable emotions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And obviously, sadly, the figures at the moment for depression with young men is just awful. It's been decreasing, and it's decreased. The numbers have increased, but obviously the situation has decreased horrendously. So I think that's a really good point. But I do know a lot of mothers of sons, especially 15 to 20, early 20s, are really struggling in supporting their sons through this. And obviously, if you've got your sons at university, it must be quite frightening right now, quite worrying to have them not even anywhere near. Well, it's been an amazing session, James. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to me tonight.
Pleasure.
It's been really good. I hope you've enjoyed watching and listening. If you haven't already, and I know the sales have been amazing of your book, so have a look at James's book. It's The Secret Lives of Men, for men and women, as is being fine, obviously, because I think we're about 50-50 with our reviews now, 50% women, 50% men. Yeah. Really interesting. And obviously, it doesn't even say men on the cover, but it's the power of a cover, really. These are really important conversations. Like I say, let's have you back again. Let's get a couple of the authors on board as well, if you're happy to. And we can really talk about this. I feel like that they're talking about the whole array of emotions, and how to get out of that self-reliance. That needs to be a TED talk, James. Really, when are you doing that?
I'm working on it.
Good to hear. Good to hear. I look forward to seeing it.
Right.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us from Nottingham, James. Great to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, brilliant. That's been really interesting. And like I said, there's so much, it's such a big subject. So really great to share it with you. Thank you for watching and listening. If you haven't already, let's join us on the Facebook group, Being Fine Book. And obviously you can buy the book from Amazon. I will be back next week, and I will be back at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday, which is our normal time for live streaming. But thank you very much. I'm Jo Baldwin Trott, and I will see you again. Take care. Bye.